The gravel crunched beneath small sneakers as the school bus disappeared around the bend, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the echo of cruel laughter still ringing in the afternoon air. 8-year-old Emma clutched her faded purple backpack tighter against her chest as she began the familiar walk down Maple Ridge Road toward her family's modest farmhouse. The September sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cornfields that stretched endlessly on both sides of the narrow country road. What should have been a peaceful walk home had become something she dreaded more with each passing day. The Morrison family had moved to Oakfield Valley just 3 months ago, seeking a fresh start after Emma's father died in a construction accident. Her mother, Rebecca, had inherited a small farm from a distant relative, and they'd packed up their city life to start over in this quiet rural community. Emma had hoped that leaving behind the busy streets and crowded schools of the city would mean leaving behind her troubles too. But bullies, she was learning, existed everywhere. The sound of bicycle wheels on gravel made her stomach twist into knots. She didn't need to turn around to know who was approaching. The 3 boys had made it their mission to torment her ever since her first day at Oakfield Elementary. They were all at least 2 years older than her, bigger, stronger, and filled with the kind of casual cruelty that seemed to come naturally to children who had never been taught better. "Well, well, well," came the familiar voice of Jake Henderson, the ringleader of the group. At 10 years old, he was already showing signs of the mean streak that ran through his family. His father worked at the grain elevator and was known throughout the county for his short temper and loud mouth. "If it isn't the city girl." Emma kept walking, her eyes fixed firmly on the dirt road ahead. Her mother had taught her that sometimes ignoring bullies was the best strategy, that they would eventually lose interest and move on to easier targets. But 3 months of this treatment had taught Emma that some bullies never lost interest. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Jake's voice grew louder as he pedaled closer, his 2 companions flanking him like loyal soldiers. Tommy Wright and Billy Nichols were followers by nature, content to laugh at Jake's cruel jokes and participate in whatever harassment he dreamed up. They lived for these moments when they could feel powerful by making someone else feel small. Emma's pace quickened slightly, but she knew it was futile. The boys on their bikes could easily keep up with her walking speed, and running would only encourage them to give chase. She'd learned that lesson the hard way during her second week at school, when they'd cornered her behind the gymnasium. "What's the matter, city girl? Too good to talk to us country folk?" Jake's bicycle tire scraped against Emma's backpack as he rode uncomfortably close to her. The sudden contact made her stumble slightly, and the boys erupted in laughter. "Maybe she doesn't speak our language," Tommy chimed in, his voice high and mocking. "Maybe she only speaks city." "Or maybe she's just stuck up," Billy added, always eager to contribute to the cruelty, even if his insults lacked creativity. Emma's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she continued walking. The farmhouse was still at least a half-mile away, and she knew her mother wouldn't be home from her job at the local veterinary clinic for another hour. She was completely alone with these boys, just as they'd planned it. "You know what I think," Jake said, hopping off his bike and letting it clatter to the ground. "I think Miss City Girl here thinks she's better than us. I think she needs to learn some manners." The other boys quickly followed suit, abandoning their bikes and forming a loose circle around Emma. She tried to keep walking, but Tommy stepped directly into her path, forcing her to stop. "Please," Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to go home." "Please," Jake mimicked in a high, whining voice. "I just want to go home." The boys laughed harder, feeding off each other's cruelty like a pack of wolves. "You want to go home?" Tommy asked, his face twisted into a cruel grin. "Maybe you should have stayed in the city where you belong." "Yeah," Billy agreed. "We don't want you here anyway. You and your weird mother." Emma's head snapped up at the mention of her mother. Rebecca worked hard to provide for them both, taking on extra shifts at the clinic and doing farm work in the evenings to make ends meet. She didn't deserve to be mocked by these boys who knew nothing about their struggles. "Don't talk about my mum," Emma said, her voice stronger now, despite the tremor of fear running through it. Jake's eyes lit up with malicious glee. He'd found a nerve to press, and he wasn't about to let the opportunity pass. "Oh, we struck a nerve, didn't we? Your mum's that weird woman who works with animals, right? I heard she talks to herself while she's working. My dad says she's probably crazy," Tommy added. "Says crazy runs in families." Emma felt tears starting to build behind her eyes, but she fought them back. These boys didn't deserve to see her cry. They didn't deserve to know how much their words hurt, but they weren't finished. "Maybe that's why your dad left," Jake said with calculated cruelty. "Maybe he couldn't stand being around two crazy people." "He didn't leave," Emma shouted, her composure finally cracking. "He died." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Emma immediately regretted revealing so much. She'd given them ammunition, and boys like these never hesitated to use whatever weapons they could find. "Oh, boo-hoo," Jake said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Daddy's dead, and Mommy's crazy." "What a sad little story. At least she has a daddy who loved her," Tommy said to Billy loud enough for Emma to hear. "Mine ran off when I was 6. "Yeah, well, mine's in jail," Billy replied, "but at least he's still alive." They were trying to one-up each other with their tragic stories, but their pain didn't excuse their behavior. If anything, it made their cruelty toward Emma even more senseless. They knew what it felt like to hurt, yet they chose to inflict that same pain on someone else. "You know what I think," Jake said, stepping closer to Emma. "I think you need to learn your place in this town. And your place is at the bottom." Before Emma could react, Jake shoved her hard in the shoulder. She stumbled backward, her backpack slipping from her shoulder and hitting the ground with a thud. Her school papers scattered in the afternoon breeze, and she watched helplessly as her homework assignment disappeared into the cornfield. "Oops," Jake said with exaggerated innocence. "Looks like you dropped something." Emma bent down to gather her scattered belongings, but Billy kicked dirt in her direction, covering her papers with dust and gravel. She looked up at them with tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why are you so mean to me?" "I never did anything to you." "Because you don't belong here," Jake said simply, "and we're going to keep reminding you until you leave." Tommy grabbed Emma's backpack and dumped the contents onto the road. Her lunchbox popped open, spilling her sandwich and apple into the dirt. Her pencil case scattered colored pencils across the gravel like confetti. Her favorite book, a gift from her father before he died, landed face down in a puddle left over from the morning's dew. "Please stop," Emma begged, scrambling to collect her things. "Please, I'll do anything you want. Just stop." But the boys were beyond reason now. They'd crossed a line from simple teasing into outright cruelty, and they seemed intoxicated by their power over her. Jake picked up Emma's father's book and made a show of examining it. "What's this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "The Secret Garden. What kind of stupid book is this?" "It was my dad's," Emma said, reaching for it desperately. "Please give it back." Jake held the book higher, well out of Emma's reach. "Maybe your dad had better taste than you. Maybe I'll keep this." "No!" Emma jumped for the book, but Jake tossed it to Tommy, who caught it with a grin. "Keep away!" Tommy shouted, and the boys began tossing the book back and forth over Emma's head while she jumped helplessly between them. The game continued for several minutes until Billy, in his eagerness to catch the book, fumbled it. The precious volume tumbled to the ground, landing in the deepest part of the muddy puddle with a sickening splash. Emma stared at the book in horror. The pages were already soaking up the muddy water, the ink beginning to run. It was ruined, completely and utterly ruined. The last gift her father had given her, the book he'd read to her during his final weeks in the hospital, was destroyed. "Oops," Jake said again, but this time his voice carried genuine satisfaction. "Guess you should have been more careful with it." Something inside Emma snapped. The grief she'd been carrying for months, the loneliness of starting over in a new place, the daily torment at the hands of these boys. It all came pouring out at once. She lunged at Jake with a fury that surprised them all, her small fists pounding against his chest. "You ruined it!" she screamed. "You ruined everything!" Jake was caught off guard by her sudden attack, but he quickly recovered. With a casual backhand, he knocked Emma to the ground. She hit the dirt road hard, scraping her palms and knees on the rough gravel. "Don't you ever touch me again, you little freak," Jake snarled, standing over her menacingly. Emma tried to get up, but Tommy pushed her back down. "Stay down where you belong," he said. The boys formed a circle around her again, and Emma realized with growing terror that they weren't planning to stop with simple intimidation. There was something darker in their eyes now, a violence that went beyond typical childhood bullying. "Maybe we should teach her a real lesson," Billy suggested, his voice carrying an edge that made Emma's blood run cold. Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe we should." He grabbed Emma by the hair and hauled her to her feet. She cried out in pain, but there was no one around to hear her. The nearest farmhouse was over a mile away, and the corn grew high enough on both sides of the road to muffle any sounds. "See that fence post?" Jake asked, nodding toward a weathered wooden post that marked the boundary of the adjacent property. "I think your head needs to get acquainted with it." Emma's eyes widened in terror. These boys weren't just bullying her anymore. They were planning to seriously hurt her. She struggled against Jake's grip, but he was much stronger than her. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't." "Should have thought of that before you attacked me," Jake said coldly. He began dragging her toward the fence post while Tommy and Billy cheered him on. Emma's feet scrambled for purchase on the loose gravel, but she couldn't break free. The wooden post loomed larger as they approached it, and she could see the rough splinters and rusty nails that would soon be making contact with her skull. Just as Jake raised her head toward the post, the sound of an engine cut through the afternoon air. All four children froze as a pickup truck appeared around the bend in the road, moving fast and kicking up a cloud of dust in its wake. "Someone's coming," Tommy said nervously. "So what?" Jake replied, but Emma could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "They don't know what we're doing." The truck slowed as it approached them, and Emma's heart soared with hope when she recognized the faded blue paint and the dent in the passenger door. It was her mother's truck, and Rebecca was behind the wheel. Jake released Emma's hair and stepped back, trying to look innocent. The boys quickly scattered to their bikes, putting distance between themselves and their victim. But it was too late. Rebecca had seen enough to understand what was happening. The truck came to a stop just a few feet away from where Emma stood swaying on unsteady legs. The engine ticked as it cooled, and for a moment the only sound was the distant rustle of corn in the evening breeze. Rebecca Morrison stepped out of the truck with fluid, controlled movements that spoke of training and discipline. At 34, she was still lean and strong from her years in the Marines. Though she'd tried to bury that part of her life when she became a mother, she'd traded her combat boots for work boots, her uniform for coveralls, and her rifle for veterinary tools, but some things couldn't be completely buried. Emma had never been happier to see her mother, but she was also worried about what might happen next. Rebecca had never told Emma about her military service in detail, but there were clues. The way she made her bed with hospital corners, the efficiency of her movements, the distant look that sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was watching. "Emma," Rebecca said quietly, her voice carrying easily across the distance between them. "Come here, sweetheart." Emma stumbled toward her mother on shaking legs, leaving her scattered belongings behind on the road. The boys watched nervously as she reached the safety of Rebecca's side. Rebecca's trained eyes quickly assessed the situation. Emma's torn clothes, scraped knees, and tear-stained face told part of the story. The scattered school supplies and the waterlogged book in the puddle told the rest. Her daughter had been hurt, humiliated, and terrorized by these boys, and something cold and dangerous stirred in Rebecca's chest. "What happened here?" Rebecca asked, her voice still quiet, but carrying an undertone that made the boys shift uncomfortably. "Nothing," Jake said quickly. "We were just talking." Rebecca's gaze moved to each boy in turn, reading their body language with the skill of someone trained to assess threats quickly and accurately. Jake's defensive posture, Tommy's nervous fidgeting, Billy's inability to meet her eyes. They were all guilty, and they all knew it. "Emma," Rebecca said without taking her eyes off the boys, "tell me what happened." They took my book," Emma said through her tears. "Daddy's book. They threw it in the puddle and ruined it, and they said terrible things about you and about Daddy." Rebecca's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She looked down at the destroyed book, recognizing it immediately. She'd been with Emma's father when he bought it, had watched him read it to their daughter during those final weeks when he was too weak to do much else. It was irreplaceable, and these boys had destroyed it for sport. "Is that true?" Rebecca asked the boys, her voice still eerily calm. "It was an accident," Tommy said quickly. "We didn't mean to—" "Stop," Rebecca said, and the single word carried such authority that all three boys immediately fell silent. "Don't lie to me. I know what I'm looking at, and it wasn't an accident." She took a step toward the boys, and they instinctively stepped back. There was something about her presence that was different from other adults they'd encountered. Most grown-ups blustered and threatened and made a lot of noise. Rebecca Morrison was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, and somehow infinitely more intimidating because of it. "You hurt my daughter," Rebecca said, and each word was carefully measured. "You destroyed something precious to her. You terrorized an 8-year-old child for your own amusement. Do I have that right?" "Look, lady," Jake said, trying to regain some of his earlier bravado. "Kids fight. It's no big deal. Maybe you should teach your daughter not to be such a crybaby." The words were barely out of his mouth before Rebecca moved. One moment she was standing 10 feet away. The next she was directly in front of Jake, her hand wrapped around his wrist in a grip that was firm enough to command his complete attention without causing real damage. Jake's eyes widened in shock and pain. He'd never experienced anything like the precision of Rebecca's grip. It was as if she knew exactly which pressure points to squeeze to cause maximum discomfort while leaving no marks. "Let me explain something to you," Rebecca said, her voice still calm, but now carrying an edge that made all three boys' blood run cold. "What you just witnessed wasn't a fight between children. It was 3 older boys ganging up on one younger girl. It was bullying, and bullying is what cowards do when they're too weak to pick on someone their own size." She applied just a bit more pressure to Jake's wrist, and he gasped. "You want to know what strength really looks like? Strength isn't hurting people smaller than you. Strength isn't destroying things that don't belong to you. Strength is protecting those who can't protect themselves." Tommy and Billy watched in fascination and terror as their leader was reduced to whimpering under the grip of Emma's mother. They'd never seen Jake look scared before, and it was both shocking and oddly satisfying to witness. "Now," Rebecca continued, "you're going to apologize to my daughter. All 3 of you. And then you're going to go home and think very carefully about whether you want to continue down this path." "We're sorry," Tommy said quickly. "We're really sorry, Emma." "Yeah, sorry," Billy echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca's grip on Jake's wrist tightened slightly. I didn't hear you. Sorry, Jake gasped out. I'm sorry, okay? Rebecca held his gaze for a long moment, making sure he understood that this wasn't just an empty apology extracted under duress. This was a lesson, and she was going to make certain it stuck. Good, she said finally, releasing his wrist. Jake immediately cradled it against his chest, rubbing at the red marks left by her fingers. Now I want you to understand something very clearly. If I hear that you've bothered my daughter again, if you so much as look at her wrong, you won't be dealing with an ordinary farm woman. You'll be dealing with someone who spent 8 years in the Marines, someone who knows very well how to handle threats. The boys' faces went pale. Marines were the stuff of legend in small towns like Oakfield Valley, and the idea that quiet Mrs. Morrison was a trained warrior was both thrilling and terrifying. "Do we understand each other?" Rebecca asked. All 3 boys nodded vigorously. "Excellent. Now collect my daughter's belongings and place them gently in the back of my truck. Every last pencil." The boys scrambled to obey, gathering Emma's scattered school supplies with a care and attention they'd never shown anything in their lives. They even attempted to salvage the waterlogged book, though it was clearly beyond saving. When everything had been collected, Rebecca opened the passenger door of the truck for Emma. "Get in, sweetheart. Let's go home." As Emma climbed into the truck, Rebecca turned back to the boys one final time. "Gentlemen, let me leave you with a piece of advice. The world has enough bullies. What it needs is more protectors. You can choose which one you want to be, but choose wisely, because there are consequences for hurting innocent people, and I am one of those consequences." With that, she climbed into the truck and drove away, leaving the 3 boys standing in the road with their bikes and their suddenly deflated egos. As they drove toward home, Emma looked at her mother with new eyes. "Mom, were you really in the Marines?" Rebecca nodded. "For 8 years, before you were born. I served 2 tours overseas. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because I wanted you to see me as your mother first, not as a soldier. But today, you needed to see both sides of me. Are you going to get in trouble for what you did?" Rebecca smiled for the first time since arriving on the scene. "Probably not. I didn't hurt anyone, just taught them some manners. Sometimes bullies need to understand that their actions have consequences." "Will they leave me alone now?" "I believe they will. But Emma, I want you to remember something important. What those boys did to you today was wrong, but my response was measured and controlled. I never lost my temper, never hurt anyone unnecessarily. That's what real strength looks like, the ability to protect others without becoming a bully yourself." Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure she completely understood the distinction her mother was making. All she knew was that the 3 boys who had been tormenting her for months had been reduced to apologetic, frightened children in a matter of minutes. "Mom, will you teach me to be strong like you?" Rebecca reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "You're already stronger than you know, sweetheart. You stood up to those boys even when you were scared. You protected what was important to you. That's real courage." The news of the confrontation spread through Oakfield Valley like wildfire, as news always did in small towns. By the next morning, everyone knew that quiet Mrs. Morrison had faced down the Henderson boy and his friends, and that she was a former Marine with combat experience. Some parents were shocked by the revelation. Others were quietly relieved that someone had finally stood up to the young bullies who had been terrorizing smaller children for years. Jake, Tommy, and Billy found themselves the subjects of intense scrutiny from their own families, many of whom were embarrassed by their children's behavior. At school the next day, Emma walked through the hallways with her head held high for the first time since starting at Oakfield Elementary. The other children looked at her differently now. not with pity or fear, but with a kind of respectful curiosity. Word had spread that her mother was a real-life warrior, and that made Emma special by association. Jake, Tommy, and Billy kept their distance, just as Rebecca had predicted they would. But more importantly, they stopped picking on other children as well. The lesson Rebecca had taught them about strength and consequences had taken root, and they found themselves reconsidering their behavior toward all of their classmates. Mrs. Henderson came by the Morrison farm a week later to apologize for her son's behavior. She was a small, tired-looking woman who clearly struggled to control her eldest child. "I don't know what you did," she told Rebecca over coffee in the farmhouse kitchen, "but Jake's been different since that day. He's been helping with chores without being asked, and he actually apologized to his little sister for something he did last month." Rebecca smiled. Sometimes children just need to understand that actions have consequences. Jake's not a bad kid, he was just testing boundaries. "Well, whatever you said to him worked, and I want you to know that you have my full support if he ever bothers Emma again." Over the following months, Emma flourished in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. The confidence that had been slowly eroded by months of bullying began to return, and she made friends among her classmates who were no longer afraid to associate with the target of Jake's group. She also began asking her mother to tell her stories about her time in the Marines. Rebecca was initially reluctant, wanting to protect Emma from the harsh realities of war, but she eventually realized that her daughter needed to understand where her strength came from and how it could be used responsibly. "The most important thing I learned in the Marines," Rebecca told Emma one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "wasn't how to fight. It was when to fight. Real warriors don't go looking for battles, they try to avoid them. But when someone threatens innocent people, when someone hurts those who can't defend themselves, that's when you stand up. Like you did with those boys." Exactly like that. I could have hurt them badly if I'd wanted to, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was to stop them from hurting you and to teach them a better way to behave. Emma absorbed these lessons with the seriousness of a much older child. She began to see strength not as the ability to dominate others, but as the responsibility to protect those who needed protection. A year later, when a new student arrived at Oakfield Elementary, a shy boy whose family had recently immigrated from Guatemala, Emma was the first to befriend him. When some older students began picking on him for his accented English, Emma stood between them and their target with a confidence that surprised everyone. "That's enough," she said firmly, and there was something in her voice that reminded the potential bullies of her mother's quiet authority. "Leave him alone." The older students, remembering what had happened to Jake Henderson's group, decided that picking on the new boy wasn't worth the risk of dealing with Emma Morrison's family. Emma helped the new student Carlos with his English homework and showed him around the school. She introduced him to her friends and made sure he felt welcome in Oakfield Valley. It was exactly the kind of behavior her mother had hoped to instill in her. Rebecca watched her daughter's growth with pride and satisfaction. The frightened victim child who had been tormented by bullies had grown into a confident young girl who protected others. The cycle of cruelty had been broken, replaced by a cycle of strength and compassion. The three boys who had once terrorized Emma went on to become very different people than they might have been. Jake Henderson eventually became a volunteer firefighter and was known throughout the county for his willingness to help neighbors in need. Tommy Wright joined the Army after high school and served with distinction overseas. Billy Nichols became a teacher and was beloved by his students for his kindness and patience. None of them ever forgot the lesson they'd learned on that dusty road outside Oakfield Valley. They'd discovered that true strength wasn't about hurting others, it was about protecting them. And they'd learned that lesson from a quiet farm woman who had chosen to use her strength wisely and responsibly. Years later, when Emma told the story to her own children, she would emphasize the same lessons her mother had taught her. Strength without compassion was just bullying. Power without responsibility was just cruelty. But when strength and compassion worked together, when power was used to protect rather than to harm, that was when real heroism emerged. The dusty book that had been destroyed that day was eventually replaced, but Emma never forgot its significance. It represented not just her father's love, but also the importance of standing up for what mattered. And in the end, that lesson proved more valuable than any story contained within its pages.